Hello students, it's Mr. Volkman. We're ready to begin Chapter 2 of our Washington State History class. 2.1, the video for today, is all going to be about the Native Americans and how they lived. Remember, Chapter 1 was about the geology and the geography of our state and the different regions our state is split up into. Chapter 2 altogether, though, is going to be about how early explorers and settlers interacted with the natives, and the consequences, both good and bad, of those interactions. As you take a look on this map, you can see it split up into very general regions where different Native American tribes lived. I want you to realize that within these big groups, many tribes lived here. Native tribe borders fluctuated, they changed because of growing populations or war. So they were not always like what you see here on this map. And in fact, in this Puget Sound Salish area, there was many different tribes within this region. Taking notes for this lesson, you're going to be comparing and contrasting the tribes in the coastal region and the tribes in the Columbia Plateau area. One way to do this is through a Venn diagram, where on this side here would be the differences, and in the middle are the similarities. Now, when you're looking at the comparisons and the differences, I want you to look at these categories. We'll be looking at their food, types of housing, the different cultural activities they did, natural resources used, and their trading. And also, I want you to pay attention to how the geography affected both groups. Now, if Venn diagrams aren't your thing, you can use a T-chart, where up here you do the differences. Of course, you need to label it. And down here, you do their similarities in bullet point form or in short sentences. All right, are you ready to begin? I mentioned before, the Native Americans in Washington State can be split up into two groups based on where they lived in the state. We have the coastal tribes and the Columbia Plateau tribes. Here we have two pictures kind of representing both these groups. I'd like you to pause the video, please, and I want you to try to quickly think of, just based on the pictures, some differences between these two groups. So pause the video, please. All right, real quick, if you're looking at these two groups, right away we can see that the houses they lived in, the structures were very different. Here we have a structure made mostly out of wood, whereas here it's some kind of material or hide. Also, even though it's black and white and the pictures aren't the best quality, we can kind of see the dress was maybe a little different as well. All right, first we're going to talk about the coastal tribes and how they use their natural resources. Remember, this is an education video, so please pause or rewind the video as needed so you can fill out your notes. Now, the natural resources for the coastal tribes definitely circled around the Pacific Ocean. If you take a look at this map, you can see all the different tribes in the Puget Sound lowlands and the coastal range. And look, with all the ocean water around them. They use marine life for food, clothing, and the Pacific Ocean and all the rivers going into the ocean were definitely used for transportation. The cedar tree was another natural resource that was used in everyday life, from clothing to shelter, which I don't have a picture of yet, but also just pots and pans and for baskets. Gray whales and whales in general, again, was another natural resource that they used. The natural resources and how they were used with the Plateau tribes. Now, again, as I talked about before, the lists I have are not exhaustive. It's not everything they would have done. The Columbia River was a major resource that a lot of the Plateau tribes used, whether it was for transportation or for food sources with the fish. Tule, or tule, was a reed or grass-like plant that was used to make permanent houses, as we see here, turning them into mats. Whichever the tribe, though, the Native Americans were really good at using the environment around them. And, wait for the bell, and they used all parts of their environment. Nothing was left to waste, whether it was a whale, or buffalo, or deer, or elk, or some sort of plant. They used all that they could around them to make their lives as good as they could be. Let's now talk about the coastal tribes and the food that they ate. First off, you need to know that the coastal tribes were hunter-gatherers, meaning their food source came from either hunting it or from gathering. Because our weather here, our climate allows for not very harsh winter, and our summers are fairly nice and not too hot, there was plenty of food available, so they did not have to search very hard to get at it. They would eat edible plants. They would also use a lot of seafood, whether it was fish, shellfish, or different sea mammals. And if we look at this website here, which is not cooperating with me, this website here would show you some pictures of different animals that they would eat for food. So if you want, you can go and try to type it out on a web search. Looking at their housing, it's important to notice and to remember that they used the red cedar. It was easy to split into wide, straight planks where they could make longhouses, as here's an example down here of it. The longhouses usually held multiple families which were related, and they were normally constructed by a waterway for ease of access to get to food and for transportation. Each family had a fire, and there was also partitions set up to separate for family compartments. I'm going to make this picture bigger here. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video, and I'd like you to read a little bit more about their shelters. Importantly, about their winter and their summer dwellings. All right, let's talk now about the Plateau tribes and their food. Now, over in the Columbia Plateau area in eastern Washington, the climate changes drastically from summer to winter. And as a result, so did the Plateau tribes' food and where they got it. Plants would die, which meant that the animals would move to get more food or go to an area where there was food. So the Plateau tribes would spend months on food searching trips. They would go to streams to find salmon, because they knew when the salmon would spawn and come upriver. They'd eat roots, berries, and camas. And you look over to your right, here's an example of camas and some of the other things the Plateau tribes ate. They hunted small to big game, such as elk, deer, rabbit, or fowl. And again, as mentioned, they would use all parts of these animals. Now, because they had to move a lot, their housing changed as well. In the summer, they used teepees, which were very easy to move around. In the winter months, they lived in more permanent housing, such as either pit houses, which is this, or tule houses, which was shown in one of the earlier slides. Now, about the cultural activities with the coastal tribes. Now, first off, since the coastal tribes did not have to move for their food, they had more time to cultivate their culture. They were able then to create these beautiful looking totem poles with animal figures that represented different parts of their family's identity. They were able to make beautiful again looking canoes. They were able to have potlatches to show their wealth and to share different items. Looking now at their social standards, extended families were very important, like uncles, aunts, and grandparents, so at least the way we look at that. Wealth was also a way to see how high you were up in the totem pole of social life. The more wealth you had, the higher you went. So you were able to climb that ladder depending on the wealth that you had. And wealth was seen as weapons, it was seen as tools, canoes, slaves, or animal skins. Also, the councils were the main guys that made the decisions. Now they had chiefs, nobles, and commoners and slaves as well. Looking now at the Plateau tribes and their cultural activities, just like with the coastal tribes, the weather affected them greatly. The same could be said with the Plateau tribes. Because the weather was so different and drastic and they had to move, they were not able to create the totem poles and the canoes and the other works of art that their native brothers and sisters over by the coast were able to do. Now, they still had wonderful works of art, but just not to the degree. Also in the Plateau tribes, we can see that there are two main languages. We had the Northern Plateau, which was mainly Salish language, and the Southern Plateau, which was made up of other various languages. The other big thing that impacted the culture of the Plateau tribes was where they were. They were at an area kind of at like an impasse, where you had a lot of other Native American tribes would meet on the plateau to trade. So they had a lot of influence from the Plains Indians, for example. And because of that, they copied a lot of the culture from the Plains Indians, like the way they dressed and the fact that the Plains Indians used horses. This was something that the Plateau natives did quite a bit. Lastly, when it came to gender roles and to the family, these specific gender roles helped to keep a balance in the native life. Women did certain things where it was closer to camp, whereas men did a lot of things that were further away from where the tribe was staying. This was also the same with the coastal tribe, but they had very specific gender roles as well. Talk about the trade between the plateau and coastal tribes. This is a great map to kind of show where they traded and who they traded with and where they came from. Obviously, the bigger the circle we have here, the more trade that occurred within it. Right here is Washington State, and you can see that this region, called the Dalles region, was a huge area where tribes from all over not only our state, but surrounding states came to trade. Now, not everyone spoke the same language, so something called Chinook jargon, which had a very limited vocabulary, 500 words, was used so that the various tribes could meet and could trade. Now, the drawback of having these huge meeting places was the fact that deadly germs could be traded at these spots as well, and as a result, Native Americans started getting sick and dying because of this. Now, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to think about a cause and effect here. Look at how the arrows are coming in, and then they leave, and look how the arrows are interconnected. How could this be a good thing when it comes to trading ideas? All right, lastly now, let's look at some trading patterns. In the coastal regions, they would trade slaves for canoes and these type of shells, which I'm not going to try to pronounce because I know I'll butcher the name. And as you can see, these shells could be put into bracelets and to any types of jewelry. And in fact, these shells were so important to the coastal tribes that they're actually used as money in their various trades. One of the things that the plateau tribes traded was for horses, which to them was something they used a lot, whether it was for going to war or for hunting. Well, this is the end of the video. Thank you for sticking through it. It was about 11.5 minutes. Definitely will work hard on trying to keep it shorter. Please don't forget to go to Edmodo and to answer the questions that will be up there. Look forward to seeing and talking to you guys about this next class. Thank you. All right, if Mr. Volkman can't keep it under 8 minutes, I think it's my turn. What do you guys think? Yeah, I agree.